Shanghai GDG is a very interesting developer community.
I'm glad somebody has asked this question.
This is where the magic happens.
This is primarily a question and answer show. So if any of you out there would like to ask questions.
Hi there, and welcome to this special episode of Chrome Developers Live. I'm Addy Osmani, and with me is special guest Seth Ladd, a developer advocate for Chrome, focusing on areas like Dart. Hi, Seth.
Hey, Addy. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. So, Seth, today I'm going to be grilling you about Dart and trying to find out some more information about it. Are you ready?
I am ready. I've been preparing all weekend. Let's do this.
Excellent. All right, so let's set the stage. Over the past few years, there's been quite an increase in the number of compiled to JavaScript languages like CoffeeScript and alternatives to JavaScript that have been coming up on the scene. Now, some of them including some rather interesting features. And it's been interesting to see sort of how they compare and how they differ to JavaScript and what's available right now. So, Dart's been around for, I guess, about a year.
Yeah, we publicly launched last October, so it's been just about a year.
Just about a year, excellent. I think the first time I remember hearing about it was on Hacker News, and as a JavaScript developer at the time, there was quite a lot of confusion about what it was trying to target, what it was going to try doing differently than JavaScript, whether it included additional tools that would help developers with sort of creating applications, and some of the messaging around it. It suggested that it was trying to solve problems that, not only could JavaScript at the time not do, but that the language couldn't be evolved to do those things either. So let's set the record straight. What is Dart, and is it trying to replace JavaScript?
Great question. It is not trying to replace JavaScript. Dart is a fresh approach, an innovation, if you will, to appeal to the broad set of developers that have a different set of expectations. And one of our beliefs on the Dart project is you shouldn't have to have 15 years of hardcore endemic web development experience to build the kind of fantastic, amazing, the apps that users expect, want, and need today. And so we want to make it easier for developers with other experiences like Java and C# and C++ and ActionScript to be able to approach web development and have the same great experience that the hardcore web developers with those tremendous amount of years of experience have, so that we can help everyone build for what's probably the most ubiquitous and powerful platform out there, the web.
So it almost sounds like you're trying to lower the barrier of entry for people coming from other programming languages, and not necessarily just targeting people who already have a good level of experience with JavaScript.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, there's a lot of people, a lot of JavaScript developers, and many of them are very experienced. And part of that's the power of the language, part of that's the platform. And they're doing great. They're obviously already launching really fantastic apps. I mean, there's some great apps out there. Google+, Google Apps, Facebook. I mean, these are large apps built with current web technologies. But then there's a whole other set of developers out there that we also want to help to bring over onto the web. And they've got a certain set of expectations around the language, sort of certain expectations around the tooling and development cycles and the use of things like patterns and practices that they've grown up with. And so if we can give them that experience and hopefully even do better than what they expect, then that just means more developers are now building for the web, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, that seems fair enough. I'm sure there are a lot of developers that love JavaScript. It's in many places considered the most popular programming language at the moment, at least for the web, definitely. With so many active contributors sort of working on JavaScript engines, V8, Chakra, SpiderMonkey, JavaScript seems to have like a really great future ahead of it. Some developers would wonder, why not try improving JavaScript, the language, and the ecosystem around it with respect to tooling, rather than, say, creating a brand new language and a whole other type of workflow. What's your response to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's important to understand that this is not an either-or world. This is an and world. And if we can give more options and help more people come to the web, that's good. And let's remember that Google itself specifically continues to invest in TC39, which is the spec group working on the future of JavaScript. We still have very awesome engineers in Munich working on V8. We've got such an awesome investment in Chrome and the open web, and specifically JavaScript today. Another good example there would be our work in web components. So we're able to, I think, look at this problem of how do you get bigger, better, more complex, higher performance apps on the webs from two different angles. And we believe in a world where both of these things actually exist. And I feel personally that as long as we continue to invest in the JavaScript V8 TC39 route, and we continue to invest in the Dart VM, Dart editor route as well, we're just reaching an even broader audience, and that's good. I think, frankly, we're lucky to be able to work both angles to the same problem.
Definitely, yeah. So you mentioned complex apps and large-scale apps in your last response. Is Dart sort of optimized to be used in those scenarios where you're building something that's just very, very non-trivial?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think if you need to do some simple form validation, JavaScript's fantastic for that, right? I mean, it's got functions, top-level functions. You don't need to wrap things in classes. For the super simple stuff, not a problem. And for some developers, they can scale up. But when we talk about things like 10,000 lines, 100,000 lines of code, which is not unusual for these bigger, more complex apps, for instance, that take advantage of all of the amazing HTML5 features like WebGL for hardware accelerated 3D and file system API and WebRTC for microphones and cameras, and then when you start thinking about things like transient network connectivity and how do you write an offline app, I mean, the list goes on and on. When you add all of these things together into the same app, the lines of code grow, and we've seen that you often need a little bit more structure in your language and a little bit more power in your tools, and that's really where Dart's sweet spot is. We're really targeting those multi-thousand line programs when you have more than 10 developers working together that need to collaborate more friction-free, if you will, and that's the kind of experience that we think Dart is really good at.
So you're talking about applications with, very large teams, they're complex, perhaps there are hundreds of thousands of lines of code, a huge number of modules to them. What specifically in Dart helps me with those type of applications, versus just using, JavaScript and a modern stack composed of, require.js and what have you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So there's a lot in Dart that is going to help people scale up. And so part of what we usually talk about is scaling from the small set of functions and maybe just one class all the way up to the 10,000, 100,000 line programs out there. And Dart really allows you to do that through its use of optional types and top-level functions. So one myth we probably want to debunk is that in Dart, it's not all about just classes, right? You don't have to kind of swallow that whole pill of all these language features just to use Dart. You can start with just a simple set of functions. You don't have to use any of those optional types. You can and this is what makes the web development so fantastic, right? It's very iterative. You can start with the seed of an idea, hit reload, that acts as your compiler, and test out your ideas, grow over time, refactor to add in more features, etc. That's that scaling story that we often talk about. And that's what one of the main use cases we want to make really fantastic with Dart. Specifically, I think I can show you some of these things in action by going over to our Dart editor. So I'm going to share my screen here. So do you see this all right? Yeah,
I can see that fine.
Fantastic. So this is our Dart editor, and I'm just going to show just a few set of features here to answer your question. What does Dart do and its tools do specifically to help people write larger apps? Well, a lot of it's about the feedback of the editor and the structure of the language. So what you're looking at here is a very, very simple application, but I'm going to show a few things. One, you can probably see a bunch of red underlines, which the editor is telling us analysis, hey, there's an error. So feature number one that I love to show is the immediate feedback you get from the tools. You don't have to run the app to know where there are problems or where there might be problems. And so you can fix more in the development cycle, less during say, the unit test or the user acceptance testing level. So let's go ahead and resolve some of these errors. Well, feature number 2 of the Dart platform that helps developers scale up to larger apps is our package manager. Here it is, we're showing you, we're pulling in 3 different packages. You can tell due to the package : syntax here. And packages are similar to the NPM Node packages or Ruby Gems packages. They're a way for you to package up and distribute bundles of functionality so that other developers out there can use it. And every time you reuse code, that's code you're not writing, and that helps people scale up. So let's go ahead and run pub, which is our package manager, which you can do straight from the editor. Now it's important to remember you can do almost all of this stuff in the command line as well. Let's go ahead and run pub install. Whoops, wrong directory. And that's going to read our dependencies file, go out onto the net, pull down these packages for us, and boom, the editor then reanalyzes everything. You can see the red lines go away. So again, that instant feedback is really fantastic. The other thing you can do is just run these apps straight from the editor. So a really fantastic edit, run / debug cycle is really, really important when you scale up your apps. So let's go ahead and run here. And sure enough, my app is running, and I get cat pics. So this is probably the best thing ever you're going to see all day. So I'm going to let this sink in for a second, which you probably can't see. Let me go ahead and share the whole desktop here. Desktop. Sorry about that. There we go. Awesome. Okay,
Awesome.
So cat pic. So what you're seeing here though is 3 separate packages all working together. So that's another feature of Dart that helps people scale up. Because we've baked into the language the structure, things like classes and libraries and interfaces and optional static types. At the language level, you're now able to build upon frameworks and widgets and that other third-party developers can build, and you don't have to do this at the high-level framework level. We're doing it at the language level. So the frame itself is from a package, the widget itself is from a package, and the cat pic itself is from a package. One other thing I want to show from our editor experience here. Let me just shut off my there we go, email, is the integrated debugging experience. And so this is another really important thing. As you scale up your apps, you of course are going to run into some issues or problems. And how do you debug? How do you set breakpoints? How do you step through the code? Now, of course, Chrome and Firefox and others have really fantastic developer tools, but sometimes, and many developers have an expectation around doing that in their editor. So, for instance, we are going to set a breakpoint directly in our editor. We're going to run this app again. And what's happened is it fires this app in Dartium, our build of Chromium with the Dart VM, but it fires off the breakpoint inside the editor. And you can see here, I'm able, hopefully you guys can see, is I'm able to step through my application actually using the embedded debugger. Now, of course, we can do that in the dev tools as well. Mm-hmm. Being able to sit in the editor with all the fantastic static analysis and warnings and errors and other features of the editor like code completion, and be able to debug at the same time is a really great experience, especially when you try to scale up to 10,000 lines of code. So one other thing I'm going to show you here, a last thing I'm going to show you about some of the features that allows us to scale up is that code completion I was talking about. So let's go ahead and create an awesome class here. And do cool stuff is the method I'm going to create. And we're just going to simply say print, let's see, Dart is fun. Okay. Well, when you're able to have a more structured language and when you add things like optional static types and an editor that can do type inferencing and type propagation, you can do some really cool things like code completion. And this is really important when you try to walk yourself through APIs that you're unfamiliar with. And this happens all the time when you're talking about 10,000, 100,000 lines of code. You're going to run into libraries and classes and packages that you yourself didn't write. And the guy that wrote that might literally be in another time zone, etc. So how do you explore your program when you don't know much about it? Well, code completion here helps you do that. You can see here that the editor pops up his best guesses in this case. Actually, I think he got it perfectly right about what I can call on this awesome class here. I can do cool stuff. and I go ahead and get that code completion. And of course, if I type in something incorrect,
Yep.
I get my editor telling me, Awesome has no method called slot. So that's exactly the kind of instant feedback that I should be getting, and it's critically important when I, for instance, am working with such a large code base, I can't keep it all inside my head. There's a lot of other features I can probably show, but hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the power of the language and its play with the editor to help you scale up.
Excellent. So from a developer's perspective, how much of Dart is the language itself, and how much is the actual tools behind it? Because there you're using Dart editor, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. Dart's much more than a language. I think that's important to understand. I almost want to use the word platform. I'm not exactly sure, but it's definitely a large project. And the project encompasses certainly the language, but a set of core libraries. So we're also providing things like collection support for lists, arrays, and sets, timer support for when you want to fire off a callback, isolates, which is how we do concurrency in VMs, and even compile the JavaScript as web workers. We also have the ancillary libraries everyone expects, like unit tests and mocks, working with JSON, working with dates. I mean, the list goes on and on. So that's our libraries. Certainly the Dart editor, which you just saw. We also have plugins for Eclipse, and the JetBrains guys who make IntelliJ and WebStorm, fantastic web IDE, also have a plugin for Dart as well. There's the package manager that we just saw that allows you to not only pull down packages but publish packages. I'm also forgetting some stuff. Oh, and then of course the virtual machine, which runs Dart code natively, and we were just doing that in Dartium. And but probably most importantly, other than the language, of course, is our compiler to JavaScript. And this is a really key point. Another myth to debunk is that Dart is not just a Chrome thing. We are on a 3rd generation compiler to JavaScript, and the output is incredibly smaller than I think what people first saw, and they were rightly so shocked when they first saw it. But
yeah, I mean,
our 3rd generation,
you see sort of code that's being compiled generated by some other tool, often it's not very pretty.
Right.
What's the code like that Dart to JS actually generates?
Well, let's do that, and I'll just pull up the editor because you can do that in the editor. And so, yes, to complete the last major component of the Dart project is the compiler to JavaScript. So let's go ahead and do that now, because Dart, at its core, must run across the modern web and runs in browsers like IE9 and above, Firefox, Safari, Chrome. So if you build Dart apps, they should work in the modern web. So your question was about compiling JavaScript. So let's do that now. So we're going to take the same app, the CatPix app, and let's run it in another browser. So if I right-click here and I say Run as JavaScript, the first thing it's going to do is run Dart to JS, compile this whole thing to JavaScript. Now, it also performs this technique called tree shaking, which is really, really cool. What tree shaking does, now this is Chrome, and I can prove this. How can I prove this? I can prove it by this. About version. Right, so straight up Chrome 22. This does not have the Dart virtual machine in it. So what's happening here? Well, we've compiled the JavaScript. So this is running the JavaScript version, but we've got this fantastic feature called source maps. And source maps allow us to, let me just reload this. Whoop, this isn't what I want here. So here is our compiled JavaScript. This was your first question. I want to answer this. The JavaScript, there's no minification happening right now. That's a separate step you can run. You can also run this through Clojure compiler as well to get a smaller output if that's what you like. But the code is fairly readable, and so we think that there's secondary or tertiary steps that we can process this JavaScript code to get even smaller, concatenated, minified output. But this is the raw output. I can go into some of the things here. All Dart code runs in an isolate, and all that simply means is that we have this safer concurrency model than shared state threads, so that's why you might see this isolate word here. So that works, but I was hoping to show the source maps which doesn't seem to be running right now. So we're going to have to come back to that. But source maps is a fantastic... oh, you know what? Let me just help me out here. There's a way to turn on source maps here, right?
There should be, depending if you click
Enable
on enable source maps, yeah.
Perfect. Let me reload this. Thank you. Okay. Open this up. Aha! Great. Good. I wanted to show this. So I showed you, this was actually good because I showed you the compiled JavaScript. So it's fairly readable, but what most people want to do is actually work in the source language. So if you write CoffeeScript, you want to debug in CoffeeScript. If you want to write Dart, you want to debug in Dart.
Right.
And so thanks to our source maps, which maps the original code over to the compiled JavaScript, now the developer tools know about this mapping file. So you can see now in our dev tools, I'm able to click on the scripts and it loads up the actual Dart code. Now remember, this is regular Chrome without the Dart VM, but it's able to, through the mapping file, actually say, oh, hey, I'm going to hide that compiled JavaScript code. I'm going to show you the original code that you wrote. And I can even set breakpoints inside the original code. So now if I reload here, boom, it actually stops right at the breakpoint from the original Dart code, even though this is all being mapped back to the compiled JavaScript. So yes, the compiled JavaScript is important. It should be fairly readable. But thanks to source maps, you're probably not going to be looking at the compiled JavaScript that often. And certainly most modern web developers minify and obfuscate and concatenate, further making the compiled output just kind of like the output of an exe that your C++ compiler would generate. Mm-hmm. You don't really look at that. You want to debug it at a much more user-friendly level, and we can do that now. So
very cool.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I love source maps. If you could go back to that window for a moment, I'm not sure if it's been closed up. I had a question about the source. So I was just wondering, in that source view of sort of what was generated, how much of that code was sort of the application itself, and how much of it was sort of Dart-specific runtime or utilities and other stuff?
That's a great question. I'll share this here, and I'll just pull it up in the editor itself. That might be a little bit easier for us to look at. So you're probably lines of like things like jQuery, which you download a 30K kind of boilerplate code, right? And that includes
Seth, we can't see your window at the moment. Just a second.
You might have to click the... Can you see that?
No, it still seems to be gone. Could you... we're going to have a technician look at that. Could you talk us through sort of roughly how much of what we saw was sort of runtime versus actual app code?
Yeah, certainly. So thanks to our Dart to JS compiler's technique called tree shaking, it worked really hard to eliminate the unused bits of code, which is really important. It's interesting, when you go to any JavaScript library, the main marketing bullet point is how small they are, and which is important, obviously, for many reasons: network, bandwidth, latency, etc. But as a developer, I want to know, does the library do something useful, right? Does it actually help me, not how small it is? Because I want the linker step or the compiler step to prune everything out for me. So the code that you see compiled to JavaScript is pretty close to the minimal set of code required just for that application.
Okay.
There's not a lot of boilerplate, if you will, very, very little bits of it.
Excellent. A question that we got through was developers were obviously wanting, so TypeScript was announced in the past week. There's a lot of interest around it. A natural thing for developers to want to do is like compare TypeScript with Dart. Could you talk a little bit about the differences? Absolutely.
So we were very happy to see TypeScript get launched and announced. This is great. It's another company saying, hey, there's another way to write larger scaled applications out there, and add it with a great tooling story like Visual Studio has for TypeScript is a validation of what we're trying to do over with Dart. So there are some similarities. For instance, the optional static typing. Both languages allow you to add static type annotations or not, up to you, and both have a great or are building up a great editor story as well. TypeScript has Visual Studio. Dart runs in the editor or Eclipse or IntelliJ.
Okay.
But then there's also some different.
To just stop for a very quick minute. We're going to reload up just to see if we can get your feedback.
Say again?
We're going to stop for just a second. We're going to reload just to see if we can get your video input back. We're good to go. Excellent.
Okay, cool.
So feel free to continue, Seth.
Okay, awesome. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. But there are some differences in the language design. TypeScript keeps, as far as I can tell, keeps the semantics of JavaScript, and Dart goes much, much further. So, for instance, Dart's integers are arbitrarily scaled out integers. JavaScript obviously has only one number type. Dart has doubles and numbers and integers. Other difference might include Dart has generics, and those generics are reified, which means the generic information, the parameterized types, are codified at runtime and compile time. TypeScript does not right now have generics, and I believe what they said is when they do add generics, they will be erased at compile or runtime. And so there is a difference there. The type annotation syntax itself is different. Dart uses the more familiar Java and C versions of type annotations where it's on the left-hand side, and TypeScript uses on the right-hand side, I think familiar to, I believe, ActionScript developers, and there's some other differences too. I think the Dart project goes a lot further. For instance, we have this concept of isolates for shared nothing concurrency. I assume that TypeScript, again, keeping with JavaScript semantics, runs in a single thread and uses things like web workers to get concurrency there. Another kind of more subtle but interesting point is Dart has you're able to downcast due to its type system, and in TypeScript there's no implicit downcasting. But in a similarity, both languages have a lexical this, which is a fantastic addition, and they all new modern languages have lexical this. But in general, they're both trying to attack the same problem. How do we enable developers to build more larger, complex apps for the modern web? And so I think that's good.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot coming out of sort of TypeScript, Dart, and other solutions like it as people start to play with it more. Going back to the idea of Dart being sort of slightly more full stack, if you will. One question we got in over Moderator was, how well does it work with, say, JavaScript libraries? People are using a ton of MVC frameworks, utility libraries, and so on. If you're using Dart, do you have to be using sort of modules written in Dartlang, or can you actually use other JavaScript libraries with it? How does that work?
That's a great question. We recently launched our synchronous JavaScript interop capability that allows you to use existing JavaScript libraries in your Dart application. Now, transparent is something like TypeScript, which is just a new syntax on the same semantics, but it does give you very, very close to transparently using these libraries. So, for instance, you can use the more synchronous stateful APIs like the Twitter API or Google Maps API or the Google Visualization API, those sorts of APIs in your Dart program, and that's really, really nice. I don't believe that the use case of jQuery is something we're targeting with this. jQuery is really fantastic because it makes the DOM feel like JavaScript. And so a one-to-one translation or I'm going to use jQuery in Dart may not be the most effective thing because Dart is not JavaScript, and so some of the usage paradigms or just simply features of the API may not work perfectly correctly. The good news is we have our own sort of version of jQuery, if you will, a better DOM that gets bundled with Dart called Dart::HTML. That's the library. And it has a lot of jQuery isms in there, and it will get better there. So I think for the synchronous stateful type APIs that many JavaScript libraries have, you'll be able to use those in your Dart code, and we have a lot of demos of that already on our GitHub account.
So if I wanted to use something like Angularjs or Backbone, I could actually use that with Dart?
I don't think Angularjs actually, because I think that again is very ingrained in some of the features of JavaScript, like its eval functionality. So it remains to be seen how good of a programming experience it might be to integrate Angular in with Dart. But I do believe that other frameworks or other stateful synchronous libraries out there, like Google Maps API or the Facebook API, those things are going to be very easy to use, and we have demos of some of those. So I'd be interested to see what happens if you try to actually use Backbone with Dart via our JS interop.
Yeah.
But what I suspect is that that's a little bit too low level to be a really fantastic experience. But we've already seen a bunch of MVC frameworks launch for Dart. And we have open source work ongoing right now for our web components plus Dart work, which we are putting a lot of resources behind to be kind of the bet we're placing on how to build a modern web app. So you look for more on that soon.
Excellent. Yeah, I was about to say my perception based on what you described was that rather than just taking existing libraries, it's probably more the case that perhaps you take existing patterns that you're used to and try to apply it to Dart, given that it's a different language. But it's really great to hear that you guys have got a great flow for people that can use JavaScript APIs for things like the Facebook integration and so on. One question that I was quite curious about was, so whenever you're picking a full stack solution or a solution that you're going to be using for a serious application, one of the first things you think about is maturity, and has that solution been already used to build a platform or an app of some sort before? Has Dart been used to build any large real-world applications either at Google or outside of it?
Well, we've seen a tremendous amount of third-party libraries already launched for Dart, which is really fantastic for a language that's not even yet at 0.1. So we're still technically technology preview. And so we've seen everything from Box2D ports to logging frameworks to multiple options for MVC. We've even seen things that like mod Dart to embed the Dart VM into Apache. You can run Dart in Heroku. And so what we're now seeing is that infrastructure of the community getting built up at the library and package and framework levels. As far as what's happening inside Google, I don't have a lot to comment on this publicly now, but I can say that there are teams working on it inside Google. And as far as public apps as well, we've seen the smaller kind of demo and feasibility study stuff right now. And I expect a lot more when we have our M1 release, which is coming up soon, and that's our first public milestone since Technology Preview, and that's essentially our statement to the world. It's saying, hey, the Dart language is in a fairly stable state right now. We've got our libraries now in a good position to be refactored and improved. Now is a good time for you to start building your apps with it. And so I think that tipping point, if you will, is going to happen very, very soon.
Excellent. So my last question, so let's move forward in the future, a year or two. Web components are hopefully in a much more stable state. They've been implemented across a number of browsers. What's the Dart story there? Do you think that it's going to greatly help people building modern, sort of futuristic apps at that point?
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned web components. It's something that we're working really hard on. And it's probably important to talk about what are web components. Web components adds the concept of encapsulation to the web platform at the lowest web platform level. If you think about it right now, you've got styles, you've got behavior through JavaScript, and you've got structure in HTML, all kind of coexisting and mashed up together. And it's very hard to introduce other libraries and frameworks together without them easily kind of getting their fingers into your code. With web components, you can easily encapsulate the structure, behavior, and styles of these components, and then reuse them with much better encapsulation, and then you can build much better, bigger applications. Dart allows us to bring this technology to you today, thanks to our compiler step. So the web component stuff, excuse me, I need some water, that we're talking about is, you're right, many years out in the future, but we can give this to you today by writing a web component with Dart. Then we compile everything down to the code that actually works in modern browsers today. And so, yeah, it's kind of like working in the future today with Dart, thanks to our compiler to JavaScript. So it's really cool. So if you want to try web components, you can actually try them today.
Excellent. Okay, I think that's our last question. For anybody, any JavaScript developer, web app developer that's watching, that wants to get started with Dart and try it out, what's the best place for them to check out, and what's the best demo application for them to look at?
Great question. Go to dartlang.org. Everything's on there, our docs, our language tours, our library tours, but then the download of the editor. That's the best way to get started. It has the SDK. It has the Dartium. Thank you so much, sir. Sorry. Here we go. Now I can go for another hour. Okay. But the editor is the best way to get started. And when you fire up the editor, you get a really nice welcome screen that has all of our demos and sample code right there. And so you can fire off any of those. It makes a copy of the code, and you can change the code and play with it and play around. And so it's really, really easy.
Excellent. I believe I've also seen some to-do MVC Dart samples floating around the web, so people might be able to find them.
Yes, that's a good point. So our GitHub repository has other samples. It has our JavaScript interop code. It has our web components work, which is fantastic. And then there's a version of to-do MVC built with, I believe, web components, all hosted open source at GitHub. And so I want to remind everybody that Dart is an open source project. We have external committers. We take a lot of third-party patches, and you can track all this stuff, the issue tracker, the mailing list, etc. So it's really, really cool to watch this stuff being built up right in front of our eyes.
Excellent. I remember checking out that web components demo built with Dart, and I thought it was really, really hot. So yeah, everyone, please do feel free to check it out. Check out the Dart website. Let us know what you think. And that's it for this session. Thank you very much to Seth Ladd for coming and talking to us about Dart. It was a real eye-opener getting to find out some more information about who is targeting and what it can actually give you out of the box. And
thank you so much, Addy. I really appreciate it.
Oh, not at all. And that's it for this session. Feel free to check in with us on Thursday, where Paul Irish and I will be introducing a brand new show called The Breakpoint, which we'll be talking about tooling in. So that's it. Thank you very much.